Thank you so much for joining us on ADHD Wise Podcast. If something in this episode has helped you, made you think, or given you language for something you've been living with, you can support the podcast by following or subscribing, leaving a review, or connecting with ADHD Wise on YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Every share, review, comment, and follow helps the podcast reach more people and helps us create conversations and resources that support neurodivergent people, families, and professionals. Thank you. Your support really does mean the world. Welcome to ADHD Wise Podcast. I'm Jannine Perryman, and this is a space for open conversations about ADHD and neurodiversity, bringing together lived experience, professional insights, and the questions that help us move forward. Wherever you are in your journey, you are welcome here. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on episode 14 of ADHD Wise Podcast. Today I have Louise Parker Engels, who I have done work with over a number of years relating to children and attendance difficulties and other things around that. She is a font of knowledge and is right at the forefront of everything that we're doing around this. She's developed frameworks. She's absolutely brilliant. So Louise, hello, how are you doing?
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's really lovely to be here.
We've recorded a podcast before, but of course that was in my previous guise. So we are quite familiar with each other and how this might go. But, you know, things have changed and the arena for school attendance difficulties, etc., is rather different right now, isn't it?
It's really come to a lot of people's attention in government and also within schools. So nationally, it's seen now as an issue. There are hundreds of thousands of children, aren't there, struggling with school. But I think there's definitely been a change. But with that has come good and bad advice. So there's different ways of approaching school attendance difficulties and the way we understand them and the way we support children. And I think that's where it's really important that we clarify, you know, what we mean when children are struggling with school attendance. So quite often we refer to as EBSA, don't we? Emotionally based school avoidance. Which
I don't use. Do you?
I call it logically based school avoidance, if I call it anything. But I think school attendance difficulties, you know, the problem with EBSA is there are lots of local authorities who have put a lot of time into updating their EBSA guidance. And there's two schools of thoughts, aren't there? So one is led very much by behaviourism and irrational fear and exposure therapy. And then there's others that are much better, that understand the whole wider issues around school attendance difficulties. And they're usually linked to unmet needs within the environment.
And there's two things about that. One is that I think that the imperative as a professional, I always think when I'm supporting a family who finds themselves in the situation, is to look at all push and pull factors. And you've got to be real with the families as well as with the schools around that. It's just like, what is really going on here? Because you do see some sort of situations where, you know, for whatever reason, the child is pulled home. But actually the majority of stuff seems to be the child is being pushed away from school. And so things like EBSA or school refusal, those make assumptions that I don't think are helpful. I prefer to approach every situation with no assumptions and just spend time listening.
And understanding what might be happening. You know, what may we see, the kind of things that we're seeing on the surface, but what may be happening underneath that actually leads to this difficulty with attending school.
With that in mind, your organisation is called Define Fine.
We're called Define Fine because the majority of our parents, even myself with my own lived experience, when we go into meetings in schools, our children are at least initially described as being fine in school. So I think it's really good to question that and say, how do we define fine? What do we mean by fine? Are they actually fine? We would want to see that they're happy and they're healthy and they're thriving, they're learning, they feel safe. That is the expectation for children at school, isn't it? And I think if it's anything less than that, then they're not fine. So the children who mask may look fine. They're children who are trying to fit in, blend in, not be noticed, not cause any bother to anybody. They're not fine. So we see those things on the outside, don't we? We see things like increased tummy aches and changes to sleep, changes to diet, changes to things that they might do socially, a reduction in school attendance, and changes in behaviours and, going to school late. But underneath, there's so much more going on. And I think that's absolutely right what you said, that we need to be questioning really what might be happening and what may be causing this. And when we talk about push and pull factors, even they are not as straightforward as you would think. So we quite often get parents being described as being anxious themselves or projecting onto their children, or a child with separation anxiety, that no professionals actually diagnosed any anxiety or that particular. But actually, if you're a child who struggles with school attendance because of the school environment, unmet needs, mental health, physical health, home is going to feel like your safe space. So it will be your pull, because you're going to be with the people at home who understand you.
I was speaking to a young lady. She's in year 10, and she said, I've come home early from school today. And I said, okay, what's up? And she said, I was just so tired. I just they asked my mum to come pick me up because I was just so tired. And I had a conversation. I was just like, because this is a recurring theme, it's probably worth having a blood test just to make sure there's nothing underlying. But based on everything that I know of you, I feel like you're probably doing quite a lot that school can't see you're doing. And she kind of ran through some things with me, and I was just like, I can see why this is difficult. And she said that one of the things that she really struggles with is when adults are just talking for a long period of time, and she is required to just sit and listen, but cannot listen. So she has to sit and just basically zone out. And so she's just like, and so I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm literally falling asleep because I cannot do it anymore. It's awful. It's painful. And I'm like, so her push factors from school are the monotony of it, the fact that it's sort of like being delivered a curriculum rather than an engaging curriculum. She is autistic, ADHD and dyslexic, so that obviously creates some barriers to education for her. She doesn't yet have an EHCP, and she's in year 10. So this has been going on a very, very long time, and it's like, and I said to them in the meeting, when I had a meeting with the school a couple of weeks ago, and I was just like, look, she has, she's spending her time fitting in. She doesn't have a secure sense of belonging. It's, and I can see that we're at real risk of tripping into attendance difficulties here. And they said, they actually agreed with me. They actually did agree with me, which was fantastic, but it's just too late in the day, really, isn't it? It's like, they should have been picking this up a long time ago, and it shouldn't really required me to be sat there alongside the parents, having spent hours with this young lady to get to that point. But that's where we are.
I think that's the problem, and as well with insisting that children are fine when they are first beginning to struggle. If we can keep open mind about it at that stage, that's the point where we can put those quite simple, reasonable adjustments in place. They're the things that we're going to be asking for to make that environment, to help their needs be met. And what we find is when that doesn't happen in a timely way, then children do deteriorate. It's very rare for them to spontaneously just get better and all of a sudden they're back at school, because quite often when they do it, they go in little fits and starts, don't they? And they'll try and they'll put a big spurt on, they'll try and then they just can't do it, and then they'll try again. So actually then you go through this process of being late or reduced attendance, and then non-attendance at all, not even able to attend at all. At that point, usually the school and everyone agree, that they're not fine. But we find even more so now than the kind of things that would have helped way back then are offered at that point. And they need something different at that point, because they're ear defenders or dropping one subject or being greeted at the door a bit later. That would have worked in the early days, taken off the pressure, that everybody understood that they were actually struggling instead of that they were insisting they were fine. That wasn't there. And that's not enough of a pull anymore to come back into school. So at that point, all of our children then, particularly neurodivergent children, are then at risk of burnout and school trauma, because they've been in this environment that's been so difficult for so long. And again, that takes another type of support to be able to recover from that. So the earlier everyone can agree, even if they can say, I wonder if they're not actually fine, I wonder if there is something else going on, and assess for that and make referrals and try and seek advice around it and get a really good plan that's co-produced in place. That makes all the difference in those early stages.
When you think about what the government is trying to paint a picture of in terms of their reforms, sort of like, early assessments, etc., what's your thoughts?
Terrified. I find it
Me too.
really terrifying, because the gatekeepers for the support are the people who are saying they're fine, and so they're not going. I'm concerned that the same thing will happen, except that when we look at the kind of support that our parents ask for their children, they at least have applying for their own education healthcare plan and appealing it, and appealing placement, and trying to find somewhere more suitable down the line. So unless there is something really dramatically changes within schools, bearing in mind these are the professionals who are referring parents for fines, for FPNs, fixed penalty notices and prosecution, and they go down that route quite quickly for a lot of parents, and referring and insisting that this is to do with parenting, that you need early help, or this is a safeguarding issue, that you're not sending your child to school, you neglect, educational neglect, fabricating an induced illness, whatever it is. If they are currently triaging in that way, what's going to change that would make them triage to, I wonder if this child's struggling, from the very earliest signs, particularly the maskers who aren't causing them any problems. And I think those that are just trying so hard to fit in. We were saying earlier, weren't we? I have never yet gone into a school where the very first response was, we're wondering if there's something in our school environment that's not suiting this child. That comes much later, and lots of schools are able to accept that much later down the line. But it always goes to, they're absolutely fine in school, or it must be something to do with parenting. And have you tried this? Have you tried your sticker chart? Have you tried making home uncomfortable? Have you tried, all of these things?
So let's look at that, the idea that have you tried making home uncomfortable? So let's look at that from an adult perspective. Say somebody was struggling to go to work because work was difficult for them. Say they had work-related stress and they were at home. Would the answer to getting them feeling better and really well and getting back to the workplace be to make home awful as well? Or are you actually kind of like threatening their long-term well-being and actually maybe even sort of creating a crisis? And if that's the case for adults, the case is more so for children, not less.
Absolutely. And also bearing in mind that there are certain jobs that, although we don't always get complete choice over which job we apply for and are successful and which job we get, there are some jobs that we would avoid because they don't suit us and the way that we are. So if we had, sensory difficulties and we were very, very sensitive to noise, then we wouldn't choose to go into a noisy environment. So children already don't have that choice. They haven't got that choice of what would be the best place for me to go and learn in and spend my days. And again, yes, no way would we say to someone who was struggling with work, well, just come in for 5 minutes today and then you can come in for 5 more minutes tomorrow, and we'll increase it like that and make home really uncomfortable. Make sure you're sitting there in your work clothes. Don't watch the telly during the work day. I remember one of my children saying, well, Mum, when I'm not well, you put me on the sofa and you make me a drink and make me a sandwich, and either we'll sit and watch television together, or, we'll do something, I can do something and relax. But because I'm not going to school, I still feel like I can't help this and I'm poorly. But there's pressure constantly throughout the day. And that was a mistake that I made very early on, that I look back now and think we would spend a whole day trying to get to school and then we try again the next day. And it wouldn't just be, it's time for school and we're all getting ready. It's, well, how about if we try and go in at lunchtime? How about break time? After registration, break time, lunchtime, after lunch. And one of mine told his psychiatrist that his favourite part of the day was, they said, what do you like about school? And he said, the burgers at lunchtime, at break time. So he said, the burgers at break time. And so I would take him in for a burger at break time, but it wasn't enough of a pull for him to be able to manage the rest of the school day. The other thing he loved was coming home on the bus so he could be with his friends. So we went to an out of catchment area school and we drove miles. Some days I drove miles just to plop him on the bus to then drive back to the pickup point because that was the bit that he liked. But actually there is research data out there that shows that these children are predominantly, they are distressed around school, and that they are, they are genuinely really struggling. And there's some research that someone called Amelia Green, she did for her master's degree, and her work is published by the PDA Society from her dissertation. And she found that all of these things that were said, like get up earlier, have a more structured morning, take away the internet, make home more uncomfortable. 89% of parents said nothing helped at all. It didn't matter what we did. It didn't help, which goes back to it's not an irrational fear. It's not just a behaviour. It's not a choice. It's I'm unable to attend unless there are changes made that make me either able to attend that school or a different kind of place to do my learning.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I think anybody who was listening to this who doesn't have a child who is struggling to attend school would struggle to fathom how difficult this is. But I would also argue that all of our children are not benefiting from the current education system. It's just that our most vulnerable ones, our most attuned ones, our children, our neurodivergent children, the ones with a lower tolerance in the end anyway, are the ones who are sticking out first. But I think that actually we've got massive problems in the education system. It's just compliance culture.
There are, and that's the other thing with the white paper really around education, was there was so much that could have been proposed that would make changes for everybody that would have helped our children who struggle with school attendance as well. So, when you've got smaller class sizes and different ways that lessons are delivered and structured, all of those things would really have helped. The zero tolerance for behaviours, the whole, you've got to sit still and look at your teacher, you have to make eye contact, all those things that have kind of come in, but there's no educational basis for that. There's no educational basis for the way that the timetables run at schools. And I think when you were saying about
100-minute lessons was the one of the ones I heard about. It's like, oh my gosh!
Yes, it's just organisational, isn't it? It's how do we timetable all this amount of people in this building and the staff so that everybody has a little bit of something. And actually that just doesn't work for lots of children. Lots of children need hands-on, they need to experience, they need play, and those are going. So we're seeing more and more within our group, we're seeing children younger and younger. So it used to be mainly that transition from as they got older, maybe around year 6, something started to happen, but particularly with transition to high school. And we're just seeing children who come out of preschool or even at preschool and they're being made ready for school, and it just isn't working for them, and it's distressing them, and they're burnt out before they've even started. Whereas we know in other countries they wouldn't have even started school and they'd still be exploring and socialising and learning all of those other skills that are so important.
Yeah, I know of a 4.5-year-old who had 30 school exclusions. And I know children, secondary school age children who have got, at the beginning of April, we're having a conversation and they had detentions lined up until the 31st of May. And it's like, it's not working.
I wanted to say that, it's not working. Yeah.
It's just like, can we look at something else, please? And then just looking at neuroscience and, for example, an ADHD brain, apparently the same regions of the brain light up for ADHD children and boredom as pain. Now, that isn't necessarily apparently confirming that we experience boredom as pain. But I think if you ask most people with ADHD how they experience boredom, they would probably say it's painful. And then what you're seeing is children dissociate. They are literally sort of like drifting off, daydreaming at best, dissociating possibly, and then that's having a long-term impact on how their personality and their mental health and their wiring, because what fires together wires together. So you get used to and accustomed to dissociating in childhood, you're going to do it in adulthood, and then you're going to have great big gaps in your memory, and that's going to last. Potentially that's going to be something that's always going to happen for you if you've got into a brain wiring pattern of dissociation when things are underwhelming, boring, and to the point of pain. Because what are you going to do if you're in pain and you're stuck? Are you just going to sit there? And if you have to sit there, you're going to disappear off into your own head. And if you can possibly move, I think you're going to be disruptive.
I think that is just so true, but also it's just a lot of our children have amazing gifts, amazing interests, and the learning is not linked to their strengths or their interests. So I have children who are very dyslexic. They spent much more time, which you can understand the reasoning behind. They spent a lot more time doing more of the things they were really struggling with. And we know that we're trying to help and improve on their reading and their writing and their spelling. But they never did anything more. They never did any extra of the things that they love, and they never did anything extra of the things that they were really good at. So instead of saying, well, you're so brilliant at maths, let's do more maths. You're gifted at gymnastics, let's do more gymnastics. Let's do more PE, let's do more of what you're good at. And I think as well, when children are in this state and they're tired, and they're really fatigued and burnt out, their processing's also affected. So many of our children, when they are assessed by an educational psychologist, do have executive functioning difficulties. Either they've got working memory problems, so they can't put things from their short-term memory into their longer-term memory. And I know for one of my children who, when he was at school, by the time he realised what lesson he was in and what kind of thing he was meant to be doing, and he'd settled down to, I'm in English, I'm writing a story. What will I write my story about? Probably having got there late because he couldn't remember where his classroom was and he'd forgotten his pencil case in another place. And then it was time to go, and then he'd be off in maths thinking, I know what I could write a story about. And this whole cycle was just exhausting, And so when he wasn't well and I took him out of school briefly while we waited for a place at another school, and we did a day of English, a day of maths, a day of science, and we did this on a rotation, and he got so much done. So you know how we are. If we're in the middle of a job, do we want to stop? We want to carry on until you've finished, until you've had success, not pack it away for 3 days away when we'll pick it up again. And
or not. We might not. We might, yeah.
We might not. We might be done with it. And so we see children actually thriving in other kind of educational settings where it is based around their interests, and they're able to pace themselves. And, we've got children that I support their families where they are already going on to post-16 courses, year 9, because they've already achieved level 2, they're off to level 3 because that's the next progression for them. And school would have just held them back anyway because they would still be going along in the way that they were. But this whole hyper focus that a lot of our children have, and a lot of this interest and strength, if we can bring that in, when we say about these children who are struggling with school attendance to make school uncomfortable, actually what we should be doing is making them as comfortable and as happy as they can be, to keep them going with all their interests, because that's what makes them them. So we don't want them to be giving up their sports if they love sport. It's not you can't go to dodgeball, you can't go horse riding unless you go to school. It's a totally different environment, a different thing. We want to keep them going with their passions and their interests, because that ultimately is what will heal them as well. And it will be their focus to help them get out of the situation they're in where they just can't engage anymore.
Do you feel there is more going on for you or for your child, but you are unsure where to start? At ADHD Wise, our neurodiversity pathway offers a cross-neurotype assessment for adults, children and young people. Cross-neurotype means we look across a range of neurodevelopmental profiles and differences, including ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, language and communication, sensory processing, executive function and regulation. The pathway includes WiseClear, which helps collect detailed information from you about everyday experiences, strengths and challenges. It also includes CRAOS, which gives us an evidence base based on activities that you perform online that shows us things like attention, memory, reasoning and cognitive processing. We then build this together with a semi-structured interview so that we can triangulate the information and build a clearer picture of what may be going on for you. The aim is to help you know where you are, what might be contributing to the challenges that you or your child are having, and deciding on next steps, whether that be a diagnostic, support in school or in work, coaching, adjustments, or simply better understanding yourself or your child. The neurodiversity pathway is about clarity, direction, and helping people be better understood. You can find out more at adhdwise.uk and look for the neurodiversity pathway. So many of the children that I come across, and I say this to them quite often, it's just like, I'm really not worried about your adulthood. I think you're going to be fine. We've got to get you through this period now. You know, we've got to get you through now. You're going to be fine when you're further down the line. And one of the examples you just given, those young people who've ended up going to sort of like a college course, and going straight into that. And that's got a lot to do with further education is much more learner-centred. So in the pedagogy of our school system is it's teacher-led and the child follows the teacher. But we've now got the compliance culture that kind of goes into this, and children are being taught and we've taken all of the joy and interest of a lesson out of it, and teachers don't feel at liberty to explore with children. It literally is deliver a curriculum that's usually been written by one person within the department, and everyone's got to deliver it the same way. So there's no personality in it, which basically means you've sterilised it. So you're giving children sterile lessons and then wondering why they're not grabbing onto it. Well, of course they're not. So there's that. And then there's further education, the andragogy, the whole thing that we do know. The learning theory for further education is that it is adult-led, or you could say student-led, learner-led. So that will apply to a child, particularly a PDA child. PDA young people absolutely love being put at the centre of what they're doing. So to be given an option, this is what's got to be achieved, you've got an option of how you kind of like achieve it. That is leaning into the strengths of a child who is struggling with a lack of autonomy that our mainstream schools are just enforcing with compliance culture and zero tolerance. You know, it's really quite concerning. So, but I think the theory that of andragogy, as is in further education, is also very present within alternative provision special schools. So I think about myself as a special needs teacher and the fact that I've worked in all sorts of alternative provisions. Andragogy explains it well, because if you want to motivate a child who is in alternative provision, you use their interests to get them involved. It's not the pedagogy is andragogical. It is very much you go with them as much as you can, you know, because there's still certain things that you've got to get done. But I would say to students, when I had to get them to do something because I needed to prove they could do something, I needed to put a piece of evidence in a book, and I would say to my students, you know what? I need you to do this so that I've got evidence that you can do it, and then we will move on. And they'd say, okay, miss. They do the thing, we put that down, and we had an agreement. There's two lads in particular I can think of. We had an agreement where if they finished their work, they could do free writing. So they could go on to their laptops or their tablets or whatever it was they had available, and they could log on to the book they were writing, and they could just free write. That wouldn't happen in mainstream school. But these boys went on. One of them became an author. You know, it's just well, to be fair, both of them are authors in that context. One's a published author, and I don't know about the other one. But, you know, it's just recognising actually that it's totally appropriate to say, when you finish this, rather than having to sit there, because they can't just sit there, go and do your free writing. But I need this piece of evidence that shows me you can do this. Okay, miss. So I've given them the reason, and they know it's going to be over and done with, and they can move on to what works for them. It works. It's education. It's evidence of what they can do. It works.
I think because I was a primary school teacher, and I come very much from a background of cross-curricular learning and topic-based learning that was all the rage back in the day. And then when the national curriculum came in and everything was split into set subjects, so many of our children who struggle with school attendance, and they've got these amazing interests, it's those interests that bring them back. So I know one of my children, he had tutoring, and his tutors were able to tailor his English, his maths, his science to his interest, which is go-karting. So every piece of writing that he wrote about, he wrote stories, he wrote newspapers, he wrote letters to ask for sponsorship. It was all based, and that got him back into, and then he does more formal, and he's just at a GCSE this year, and hopefully he'll do two or three more next year. But it's got him back into that, and it had to feel relevant to him. And for many of our children, they've got those interests, and there is so much learning that you can do through those interests. And we lose sight of that, don't we? That actually education should be lifelong. It should be something that we enjoy doing, and it goes on. So many of our children who do struggle with school attendance, they will have gaps in their learning. They will have missed huge chunks of the curriculum. But as you say, some of them, it won't matter for, as long as we can help them to get better and channel their interests. One of my children, back in the day when I knew it wasn't right, I knew there was government Department for Education guidance around it, but I just tried to argue his case, and I just couldn't. They off-rolled him from sixth form for attendance because he was physically ill. And I know that that's not legal. I know that they shouldn't have done that. But actually, it gave him time to recover. It gave him time to reflect, and then to go to Open University. And then he got his degree that way. And there are children who, they might not get their GCSEs, they might not get their A-levels. A year after, they would have sat their A-levels and passed their A-levels, and they would have qualified to do an access course. Or, they may do BTECs, they may do qualifications in their chosen specialism, and it becomes a career, and it becomes a passion, and it becomes what they need to do. So one of my children, I think sleep can be a big problem with our children. For one of mine, he was diagnosed with a sleep onset disorder, and it came about through neurodivergence anyway. We know that there's often children who are neurodivergent find it hard to switch off and go to sleep anyway. But for him, it would be bedtime meant it's nearly morning. Morning means I've got to go to school. I can't do it. And his whole body clock changed. And I remember sitting in a tribunal, and the tribunal of the LA SEND officer at this SEND tribunal for his EHCP said, well, he's going to have to learn to get up in the mornings, because he's not going to get a job, is he? Unless he can get up and start work.
I don't start my I do work. I start work earlier, but I don't start my commitment to other people until 10 o'clock. But Louise, I had school attendance difficulties. I struggled to attend school.
I had school attendance difficulties.
So we've not had that conversation before, I don't think. And I left school with my highest grade being an E in English. And I did indeed not do my GCSEs and not do my A-levels, but I got onto an access course and I did my degree. And then I went back and I did my maths and English because I wanted to qualify as a teacher. So then I got them because they made sense to me, and I had to really sort of like etch out time in my life because I had children. I had 3 children and I was a single parent by that point. But it was like I wanted enough that I managed to do it. And then... yeah, we are the children that we are now supporting. So any parents sort of like watching, honestly, hopefully we're an example of the fact that it can come right in the end.
My story was different in that I became very, very burnt out. So I was a teacher. I managed to get through university just about. I had to take a year off with glandular fever. And all the way through school, I had minor illnesses that just kept cropping up. And I look back now and I realise, and my doctor, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, said, did you really have chronic fatigue syndrome all those years ago? Or was this a kind of a burnout? So I kept on going, and I did my degree, I did my A-levels, I did my GCSEs, did my A-levels, went to university, became a teacher, did some travelling abroad, some voluntary work abroad, and then crashed. And for most of my late 20s and all through my 30s, I was just not well. I was burnt out and not well. And that's the kind of thing that we want to be avoiding. But I think it's that pacing and that understanding of what our children need. And it's just so important, isn't it? So, I was saying about my son who, his in the tribunal, his officer was saying, well, he's got to get up in the morning. He most recently, he has been working as a chef nights, and he does music production and works in a nightclub. So he's DJing and managing a nightclub. So there are so many ways into education, and as you say, it's just that pressure at the time that it feels like it's everything. And of course, for schools, it is everything, because that is their everything. That's what they're doing all day, every day. And the majority of children seem to be all right, just about, or they seem to be all right, but it's not right for them. So there are things that we need to do, really. And there's a lot that can be done. You said about the framework we've developed. We've co-produced this across our membership of Define Fine. So we have a closed Facebook group, but we also have a team, and within our team we have a whole mixture of professional backgrounds, but all parents ultimately that have had lived experience and have lived experience of school attendance difficulties. So, we've come up with these. We've learnt from the power of parent peer support. When my children were struggling the most, it wasn't school that helped. It was other parents sharing and said, did you know there's some guidance from the Department for Education around that? Did you know that there's actually, and we've got, I'm just going to turn to it now, but we've got our leaflet and we've got our information on our website. But, there is currently the SEN Code of Practice. There's working together to improve school attendance, supporting pupils with medical conditions at school, education for children with health needs who cannot attend school, and basically the Equalities Act and all of those laws around to protect our children. Really, they're all out there, and the guidance is there. And that's one thing we do when we work with families. We do some peer support and peer advocacy as well, and in meetings we just rely on that, really, of sharing that information and requesting the support that the children need. Do they need assessing? Have they been seen by an educational psychologist? There's quite a checklist, and often, particularly those parents who are worrying about the implications of their child not being able to attend school, whether they're worrying about being prosecuted, worrying about social services interventions, worrying about what support does my child need. It all goes down to really gathering as much evidence as we can, and requesting these things. So quite often, I've been working in a school where the executive head teacher, CEO, I think he is, or executive head teacher of a large academy trust, also an Ofsted inspector. And he said, we've bent over backwards for this child who can't attend, and we've done so much for him. And I was just, that's great. The DFE looked to that school for a prime example of how amazing their attendance is, and, credit to them. And I was saying, that's amazing. And I was genuinely just said, and what did the educational psychologist say when they were seen by the educational psychologist? And that was met with, they've not been seen by the educational psychologist. And I said, what's the sense? Have we got the SEN support plan? Is the SENCO involved? Because in a lot of these cases, the SENCO isn't even involved. It's going down either a behaviour route, or it's going down a attendance admin type route. And so it was, we haven't got a SEN support plan. And have you referred for? So a lot of children who are not able to attend school at all, they're entitled to provision, educational provision by the local authority. We refer to it as Section 19. It's from the Education Act, and it's that the local authority has a duty to provide an education for children who are unable to attend school for health and other reasons. And that might be unmet needs, or that might be that they're not able to attend. There's also schools can apply. It's difficult because they're battling as well with local authorities and the funding issues and everything, but they can apply for higher needs funding to fund some of these provisions. And the sooner we get these alternatives in place, the better it is for these children, young people. We've got a whole cohort of families where their children have nothing. They're not being threatened with prosecution. They're not being threatened with anything else, but they're just being left and they're not attending, and they've just slipped through the net and then not getting what they need. So, it's reasonable to say, well, could you support me with a referral for whether it's a paediatrician or CAMS or whatever your child might need, to our school to support. And actually, the evidence is key. So it's the same evidence you would gather whether you're asking for support or whether you're defending yourself. So you're looking at the kind of like a timeline. When did your child first start struggling? What were the responses to that? It's good to gather some of that evidence that I was talking about, some of the government guidance, so that we can say, well, and we're always doing, Jannine and I often talk about this, that the approach of working with professionals is always to have mutual respect, and to work together. We have something that we call puzzled parent. So we'll say, I think there's guidance around that, isn't there? Or I read something. But there's an amazing part in working together to improve school attendance that actually should be protection for all of our families, as long as you are keeping school involved and informed, as long as you are cooperating. You don't have to agree to every single plan that's proposed if you don't think it's right, but to be willing to go along, meet, try things that school are suggesting, working with them, trying to work on this support plan, whether it even, you could say, could you consider applying for an education healthcare plan, or do I need to? It's just that whole working together. And actually, it's only when interventions are failing, it actually says in working together to improve attendance, in very few cases will all options of support been exhausted. And partners are expected to continue to work together and offer new approaches. And they need to try other things and keep trying until we find what it is. Do we need an assessment? Do we need the educational psychologist? Do we need more support in place? And only take legal action if support is not appropriate. And it's very, very rare with our type of children and families that support isn't appropriate. And so that's a key part of your defence, but also gathering together. And it's not easy for your own, if you are also neurodivergent, to know where all your diagnoses are and where your letters are and where your evidence is. But to gather that together, even something as simple as keeping a diary, this is what my child said to me one day. We tried to go into school. We managed to get in for the burger, but he couldn't stay for the rest of the day. Managed to get in almost on time and then was told off immediately through the door for having his uniform not correctly worn. So tie bit loose, shirt untucked, or reprimanded for being late when against the odds they've managed to get there. But keeping a record of that. And also, if you've said, there are alternatives, and do they work? Do they really thrive in a smaller group? Have they got this passion and talent for something and then they do really well with that? We're going to base support around that. So it's all about evidence, whether you're asking for support or whether you're protecting yourself. It's gathering all that evidence and keep informing school all of the time. I did have one parent who just got so cross with the office lady that she just said, I can't ring her. I can't speak to her every day and then have her response to me, But, there are ways still of doing that. Text messages, emails, just keeping in touch. And I just wish, going back to the whole triage of it, there are some areas that do this very well. And there are some areas that are very punitive about this kind of situation. But in some areas, they are able to triage. And when a referral comes in for a fine in some local authorities, they will go back to the school and say, does this child have SEND? What's their SEND support plan? Does it need the involvement of an educational psychologist? Does it need the involvement of the inclusion team? And they will push back, and then they will say, or could this be a Section 19 where they need something alternative? So if some local authorities can do it with the same guidance, then we would hope that eventually everybody would, maybe, and we wouldn't be needed anymore, would we?
I'm seeing that, and I sort of sit in meetings and even in multi-agency meetings, and each of the agencies will say what they can't do, or we can't do that because of this, and we can't do that. And I sort of sit there and I allow this to play out, but I'm sort of feeling really sorry for the parent. And I'm like, look, multi-agency practice is supposed to be about us all pulling together in the best interest of this child and this family. What do we need to put in play? What can you do? We've talked about what we can't do. Now can we please talk about what you can do? And everybody they all just sort of sit back and sort of shuffle, because part of their remit is to protect their budget. And that's what they're trying to do. And then you remind them that there's a child and a family at the centre of this. And actually, if they've had the training I've had, they then kind of like switch into, okay, we could do this, and well, what about that? And well, could we work together? And it's amazing how that then often turns around. But I have to be quite blunt, actually, sometimes in meetings, and just be like, you're all telling this parent what can't happen. Can you tell them now what can? And I never thought, and I've said this in other episodes, I never thought when I had children that one of my biggest burdens would be fighting for my children's rights and needs to be met. I just never thought that was going to be part of the parenting journey. And it is, for too many of us, it is. And so many SEND professionals became professionals because they had to be that parent. And then they stayed because they wanted to help other parents. They're giving everybody else a leg up. Now, we have an amazing community as a result of that, because it literally is just like, come on, let's pull you up as well. And now we're seeing the government disempower parents. I said on another podcast what I think about that. I think it's dreadful. I'm very concerned about compliance culture and digital ID at the same time, because I just think it's quite concerning what we're doing at the moment. But, I suppose I could get political now. That's not helpful, so I won't.
And the fact that many of our families then feel that they have no choice but to home educate, or choose to home educate, because that is a very valid response. All of these changes and changes to laws that could be coming our way are quite concerning for our community, aren't they?
And not required. They're not in the best interest of children.
No, not at all. And that there is this whole narrative at the moment that children only do well at school, that school is the right place for everyone. And we know that, I think that's where we were talking about people's own expertise. I know that there are people who have written and done their own research, and they are able to provide that information, to share. And one of those is parents who've helped to write Leicestershire Partnership Trust guidance on autistic burnout and trauma and why children struggle with school attendance. There are people within that team with lived experience of children struggling. So although things look a bit bleak at the moment, there are also more and more people coming back and who have that lived experience, who are able to use that professionally, and our own children. So one of my children, who was off-rolled from school and was too ill to go, is now working in a special school and is an assistant psychologist. So, I think that's the amazing thing, is that they bring with them their lived experience, their collective family lived experience. They bring that with them. And so now we have, I was interviewed on Radio 5 Live around some piece of research that was one of these particularly parent-blamey. Parents don't bother to send their children into school on a Friday because they've got lax since COVID and because they work from home and things like that. And it was quite interesting because the interviewer said, I have a few friends with children who struggle with school attendance. I've seen them struggling. They're neurodivergent. They can't cope with school. And actually, the interview went really well, actually. And there was someone from an online school, and there was actually, you couldn't have arranged it any better, but one of our parents, who I didn't know had phoned in to the program. She was explaining how much Define Fine had helped, because using our resources, coming to our online support sessions, being part of the group, she knew what to ask for, and she was able to request that, and her child was just about to start at an online school. And the power, and I think that's the wonder of what we do, is there are families out there who we know that we have helped, and they've been able to be empowered to help their own children to get what they need, to be able to get the education that they need, and to get better, and to return to life, because many of these children are not at school anymore. They're missing out on all sorts of experiences in life and community and family, aren't they? So there is hope.
There really is. And actually, I think it's a really good sort of like wrap up point, because we sort of said about the fact that we were like this as children. And now we're going to have a whole sway of young people who get to be the professionals of the future. So actually watch this space, because our empowered individuals who know how to advocate for themselves, we only advocate for them as parents until they can advocate for themselves, and then they won't stop. And I think that this is the thing. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the young people who have been impacted by this become those professionals. And we are seeing examples of that. Your son that you just gave the example of, and my Becca is another one, because Becca did her A-levels from home over 3 years rather than over 2 years. And we had to be, flexible at what learning looked like for her, because she was just done, absolutely done. So it's going to be interesting to see what our young people do with all of this when it's their ship to steer. We're just holding the gauntlet for now, aren't we? This has been, I hope, a really, really useful episode for our listeners, whether you're a parent yourself or whether you are a professional or whether you are an adult who's like, yeah, whatever is your situation. I hope that we've sort of like given you some hope and some guidance here, and that it's useful information. Louise's work is brilliant. We'll add it to the assets of the podcast. So do please connect with Louise and Define Fine, because what they do is absolutely superb. And if you need professional support, both Louise and I are available for that, if it's not possible for you to do it with peer support. So thank you, Louise. And we will definitely speak again and have no tech difficulties next time around.
Thanks
for listening, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to ADHD Wise Podcast. ADHD Wise exists to help bridge understanding and support for people exploring ADHD and broader neurodiversity. If you would like to know more about us and our services, please visit www.adhdwise.uk. Follow ADHD Wise UK on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn. Take care, and we'll see you next time.